Entercom is now Odyssey. If you've downloaded the radio.com app, it will now become Odyssey. That is your home for all the great content that you see across multiple different platforms here for this company that we worked for, previously known as Entercom, now known as Odyssey. So it's been rebranded this morning. Fantastic news.
Yeah, I mean, I think people think of WFAN as its own standalone thing, but no, we're part of a bigger company. It was called Entercom and Radio.com. It's now called Odyssey, and really the name is what's changing, but all the great content and being one of the industry's most influential collection of broadcasts and digital and podcasts and premium live experiences, all of that is staying the same. So Radio.com, now Odyssey, and we couldn't be more excited.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So if you've not downloaded the radio.com app, where have you been? Download Odyssey, do it today. And if you've already downloaded, no worries. You don't have to download a new app. It will automatically transfer over to the rebranded name of Odyssey. So there you go. Big news for our company. And you know, Maggie, the other big news, and there's a lot to get into over the course of the next 4 hours, but how about everything that's going on with Francisco Lindor? So
how about that?
We know what the Mets offer is, 10 for $325. Hopefully that chicken parm went down well for Saturday night for Lindor as he had dinner with the Mets owner, Steve Cohen. So we know that the Mets offer is 10 for $325. We know Lindor is now asking for 12 for $385. So the initial reporting that was out there that the Mets were under 3 and that they were about $50 million apart, well, that ended up not being true. There was a report last night that came out that the Mets were told or believed that the offer would be below the Mookie Betts offer, or the Mookie Betts contract, which was $365 million from the Los Angeles Dodgers. Lindor's over that at $385. And now, listen, the clock is ticking. The Mets' final and greatest offer reportedly was on the table last night, 10 for $325. Lindor still holding firm at 12 for $385. And there's a number of different layers to this story. Obviously, the one at the point is going to be, well, I mean, up the offer, find a deal to get done before opening day. Okay, but here's the other thing. The Met fan is going to turn here on Francisco Lindor, and you're already seeing it on social media. How do you turn 10 for $325 down? This is a global pandemic. Don't you understand? That would be the ultimate gamble. How do you do that? You saw a number of tweets last night, and you can just sense from the Met fan the frustration where, you know, they're going to side with the organization here and looking at Francisco Lindor and saying, well, how do you not take that offer? That's an unbelievable offer. That's a historic offer from the Mets. And the last thing you want to see is what has been a really good story with Lindor down in spring training get ugly here before the start of opening day, where a positive about the player being Lindor and how good of a player he is, all of a sudden he becomes an enemy of the fans because he turns down a 10-year, $325 million. You don't want that narrative following Francisco Lindor throughout the course of the season, Maggie.
No, and, you know, you guys know I'm very pro-player here, but if he's getting advice to turn down 10 for $325 because he wants to get to a bigger number because, I don't know, to have that pelt on your wall that you got the bigger contract than Mookie Betts or Tatis or whatever it's going to be, I think that is so short-sighted by not only Lindor but his representatives as well. And you know what? I think people were 100% on Lindor's side when they thought the Mets were going to come with a cheap offer. Cheap, air quotes. You know, we're talking about 9 figures here. But they thought that the Mets were going to come with a BS offer and that maybe they weren't really into getting a deal done with Francisco Lindor. Maybe they wanted to see this year play out. And it was like, man, what are the Mets thinking? You already made this trade. You brought him in. You know, now you're not going to sign him and you're not going to go the extra mile. 10 for $325 is the extra mile. You know, that is a fantastic deal for Francisco Lindor. And for him, if he's even thinking about not taking it to, like, bet on himself a la Joe Flacco, I think that would be extremely short-sighted by Lindor. First of all, you want to go next year with all that big crop of shortstops. So you're now, instead of, you know, you're going to have all these guys, potentially, maybe not all these, maybe you're competing with maybe 3 or 4 other guys, potentially, who are also going to be looking for massive deals. Is there going to be enough money to go around? So you got that. You've got this looming labor potential lockout, strike, whatever is going to happen at the end of this year. I just don't understand why Lindor would not take this deal. I mean, betting on yourself is one thing, Moose, but not to make a stupid bet. because that's what I think this would be by not taking the 325. Now, listen, he's entitled to do whatever he wants to do, but I think he would regret that. And to be honest, Betts was 365 over 12. This would be, if he does the 325 for 10, in terms of average annual value, and I know it's not going to be total dollars, but average annual, he's going to be the second highest paid player behind Mike Trout.
No, I get it. But
it's a fantastic deal, especially because Lindor plays a premium position. I understand that. He's not as good a player, though, as Mookie Betts.
No, he's not as good of a player, but he does play a premium position. If you believe you're worth something, and you've got the richest owner, here's where I have a problem with the Mets, right? If the reports are true and the Mets' initial offer was under 300, and to begin these negotiations, I can understand looking at a negotiating tactic to where I thought it was in poor taste on Friday night where Steve Cohen sends out the tweet. Then you get the dinner and you're saying, okay, well, all signs are pointing to a deal getting done. John Heyman last week saying it's better than 50-50. He's feeling good. Last night from the Mets side of things, at least, it was a case of, iffy if a deal could get done. Here's where I look at the Mets. The Mets have got to understand, when you bring Steve Cohen in, and you're a major market team, everything does change. I'm sorry, it just does. If Lindor was asking for $300+ million from Cleveland, what do you think he's going to sign for under 300? Sign for under 300 here with the Mets? That's never going to happen. And the sides are not close. The initial belief was they were $50 million apart when the Mets were around 290 or 295 million. Well, the Mets are over 300. They're at 325. Lindor's asking for 385. They're still $60 million apart. Now, you might say, well, that's not really all that big of a gap that they need to close or cover. Maybe they can meet in the middle. Maybe there's some wiggle room if you're Francisco Lindor. But let's also not forget Lindor. He has the utmost confidence in himself. He's had an unbelievable spring. It is New York. You've got the wealthiest owner in all of Major League Baseball. If you're Lindor, why not ask for every single last dollar you could possibly get? I mean, to go and say, well, you better sign this deal. Well, no, he might just say, no, I don't need to sign this deal. I feel like I'm going to get paid that and more, in the offseason. I'm going to put together an unbelievable year, and I'll hit free agency, and I'll find whether it be the Rangers or the Giants or maybe even the Mets, they'll come back, and I'll make more than the $325 million that you're offering now, Maggie, because the sides are not close. Now, Andy was reporting this morning, Martino, saying that, there's still some talking. They're trying to get creative, trying to figure out how they can make this work. Well, we do know now what the numbers are. And if the Mets offer was final and last, well, there's a $60 million gap. Do I think Francisco Lindor is now, in the next 2 days, going to blink and say, yeah, I'm going to take the 10 for 325 without the Mets moving off that number? I'd probably say no.
Well, maybe they do end up moving it up a little bit and they end up finding some common ground. And ultimately, I hope that they do. But it's one thing, sure, to ask for whatever you want. Of course, ask for whatever you want. But I'm not saying that he shouldn't ask for it. I'm just saying if I were him, this is something that I would take. Because, okay, you can talk about Steve Cohen and all the money that he has. And if you want to say he's got so much money, he should just be writing basically a blank check to me because we know that he can afford it. Well, ultimately, if he doesn't, who does that hurt? I think Lindor has more to lose here potentially by not taking the Mets offer and going into 2022 with this good free agent class. You have no idea what's going to happen this year, and you have no idea what's going to happen with the labor situation at the end of the year. That's my thing. You can say Steve Cohen can afford it. Sure, you can say the Yankees can afford to pay $400 million for guys. Ultimately, though, who does that end up hurting? If I'm Lindor, I think that ultimately, if I have that mentality, I think that ultimately ends up hurting me because I have a $325 million deal over 10 years, and we don't know. There still could be some negotiating here for a team that looks committed to winning, where you have the best pitcher in baseball, where you're in the biggest market, and where this team and ownership group, yes, by bringing you in, signals a new era in Mets baseball, but even beyond that, re-signing your own guys, adding to things behind the scenes to make this club commensurate with the market that they're in. There just seems to be, despite some of the negative stories about the Mets this offseason, which, oh, by the way, they're bringing in an outside law firm now to do a real deep dive in the culture of the Mets also and trying to clean that up finally. I think that there is just so much more why I would hitch my wagon to the Mets now and to have the risk, This isn't a low ball offer that you have to turn down and say, I'm betting on myself. Like, this isn't a low ball. You can say he has an idea in his head, but Moose, if we want to go and look at some of Francisco Lindor's numbers versus Mookie Betts, and I'm just talking about, clutch numbers. You want to go clutch numbers for how different these two guys are. And granted, I love Lindor. This is not to disparage him. I'm just talking about how different these guys are. Let's look at the numbers career-wise. Two outs with runners in scoring position, Moose. You have Lindor, 211 slashes, 211, 309, 294 with an OPS 603. Betts, 338, 459, 588, an OPS of over 1. You want to go late and close, high leverage.
I get it, but
it's all there.
Well, I agree with you. He's not as good of a player as Mookie Betts, but isn't it the same argument about, well, it's not just a matter of who's better, but whose time is up?
But your time is now, and you're getting a really good offer here.
But tell me the player. But I'm sure people in Boston said the same thing about Mookie Betts up there in Boston when he turned down the deal with the Red Sox. He ends up getting $365 million from the Dodgers. Give me the example. I'm talking about the upper echelon player, not Steven Drew.
Yeah, but what do they offer, Betts?
Give me the upper echelon player that gambles on himself ultimately, and then ends up losing. Heyman had the tweet last night, which was a great tweet. Give John credit, talking to an agent saying, when we're looking at this caliber of player, tell me the example of the multiple players that end up gambling on themselves and in the end end up losing.
Okay, but
there's not a laundry list of those players. Usually those guys end up getting paid one way or the other, and it usually supersedes the contract that they did turn down. So those guys ultimately end up winning. I'm not telling you that he's better than Mookie Betts, but it's his time to get that contract. So if we all want to look at the positives of having Steve Cohen owning the Mets, well, he's worth $14.5 billion. He made $1.6 billion in 2020. Those are all positives. Everything that he said on his introductory Zoom call, well, players are also going to look at the Mets differently and completely differently as well. And we have to have that understanding. I'm not telling you have to give Lindor $400 million or give him $385. But if I go on the report last night that the Mets went into these negotiations with the idea that Francisco Lindor was not going to ask for anything more than the $365 that Mookie Betts got from the Los Angeles Dodgers, then why was my offer under $300?
Well, I mean, I feel
why
like
would I begin? Why would I then begin negotiations?
I don't know what going back to that does.
Well, because it just because you're here. You're here. It's Tuesday morning. Opening day is Thursday. We're 48 hours away. There's a deadline to get done. If you went into those negotiations saying, and you had the belief that he was not going to ask for over $365 million, why would your initial offer then be under $3? And I've got the richest owner in all of Major League Baseball, and then laying claim that I got great movement going up to $325. Listen, it's easy to sit here and say Lindor should take the contract for everything that you mentioned, and that's fair. And then the Mets have not made an embarrassing offer. I just don't love the tactics in certain aspect that the Mets have approached Francisco Lindor here. I don't love the tweet from the owner on Friday night. Having dinner on Saturday, watch the interview that he did with Wayne Randazzo last night on SNY. Okay, all well and good. And Steve Cohen, we'll get into the black jerseys coming back as Met fans celebrate across the tri-state area. The clock is ticking. We're 48 hours away here. And now you're going to turn a positive. Here's where the Mets are in danger of. Whatever you want to say about Lindor, he's a great player. But the Met fan now is going to start to turn on Francisco Lindor if he does not take this deal. However way it got out, whether it was a Met leak, whether it was an agent leak, when that news came out last night, 10 for 325, you know this, we all know this. Fans are going to side with the owners. They're going to side with the owners with the contracts, especially when you have this kind of an offer. So I would just be very, very careful here if you're the Mets, because Lindor's been an ultra positive addition to this team. Met fans celebrated. We were on the air when that trade came down, Maggie. We were interviewing Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network. Be careful here, because you don't want to turn Francisco Lindor into an enemy of the Met fan because he turns down 10 for 325 before the start of the year. That's my only point. And you started to see a little bit of a turn to the negativity last night after news of this deal went down.
Yeah, but are the Mets supposed to apologize because they made an incredible offer to a guy that seems like it's right in line with where it should be, considering his talent and his age? Like, I don't understand why the Mets hold the cards here because of that, because there's a danger of flipping the fan base against him. I don't know if the Mets necessarily need to apologize for that. They haven't made a lowball offer here. They've made him a great offer. I don't know if it's actually the last and final, but I don't see where the Mets have to, come at it and say, man, we got to make sure that we keep everyone engaged on the fan base with him. It's up to Lindor to actually, I think, to look at this deal. And you mentioned about timing and about guys who turn down contracts. I think Lindor turning down the $200 million from the Cleveland Indians, I understood. You want to talk about Mookie Betts maybe turning down the $300 million or whatever was reported to be with Boston. I mean, that's ridiculous that they ended up trading him away anyway, considering how good he is in the future. And Boston is maybe a smaller market, but not a small market team when you look at the ownership group, and they usually have a lot of money to spend. Like, to me, the timing for Lindor is great now, less good in a year. So you can say, well, a guy who always turns this down and bets on himself, they always win. Okay, but this is a unique case here with a massive shortstop class coming up soon and labor unrest on the horizon. So not every bit, like, the timing for Lindor to me is now. That's the timing. Is to get your $300 million,
but
Lindor
also goes into it eyes wide open because, correct me if I'm wrong, he is a player rep. So, I mean, he has a good idea about everything that's going on with the CBA, and he's not going in there with, this all shucks, I have no idea what the hell's going on. Francisco Lindor has a good idea about what's going on in the CBA afterward, and if he's going to stay to his guns, 12 for $385, and the Mets are offering 10 for $325. Listen, the Mets have made an unbelievable offer. I might not agree with some of the tactics and the tactics that they had in these negotiations with Lindor, but they stepped up and made him a historic offer, 10 for $325. But all the positivity that has surrounded Francisco Lindor, it will start to turn if he turns this deal down. That's all. And now the Mets might not care. The Mets might say, listen, we did our job. We'll go get another player. We'll go sign Correa. We'll go sign Story. We'll go sign, Javier, but whatever it might be after this season and say, well, we were comfortable, we said at the time, having 1 year of Lindor, and if he leaves in free agency, so be it. Hopefully we win a World Series and we go from there. That's fine. That's A-okay, and they can go attack it in another way and not have to pay Francisco Lindor. However, the story does change now with the offer being what it is. Now we're 48 hours away from opening day. We know that's the drop-dead date for negotiations here for the Mets and Lindor, and we're still $60 million apart between both sides.
Yeah, for once, I don't see the Mets as being responsible for potential fan misery here. As Steve Cohen said, it does take two people to sign a deal.
It has nothing to do with responsibility. It's just the facts.
No, but it's kind of putting it on the Mets to make this right with Lindor. This is how you're painting it. It's on the Mets to make it right with Lindor and to budge on this negotiation for risk of alienating him from the fan base, knowing that the fan base is most likely going to really
they're going to side with the owners.
They're not going to understand it, quite
frankly.
They're going
to side with Cohen.
They're going to side with Cohen, and because $325 million, it's not just that the number's big, because professional sports these days, like, this money is so abstract, like $325 million. We talk about these numbers. I mean, it's hard to even wrap your brain around them. But just the fact that it's not just that it's a huge number, it also feels more than fair and right where you were expecting it to be. This isn't the lowball. It's not the BS offer. It's not the crap offer. And so the Mets are not responsible to necessarily overpay just to make sure the fan base doesn't turn on Lindor. He has to participate here too. And if he doesn't care and he wants to go to free agency, I would wish him good luck, but I would also say that I think that's bad advice. I think that's bad advice either from him to do this for pride's sake or because if I were his representatives, I would not advise him to not take this deal.
Yeah, listen, I think a player's got to be happy with the contract they sign. If he doesn't feel it's great value for him or it's enough for him, who am I to tell him, no, you know what, you better sign that deal. You're making him, if you're Francisco Lindor and you have the gumption and the guts and the cojones to turn down 10 for $325 and bet on yourself, God bless. I mean, it's an amazing,
stupid.
It's an amazing bet on yourself if you're Francisco Lindor. So I'd be uncomfortable telling you better sign that deal because I knew he was asking for $300+ million from Cleveland. We all know that. That's what he was asking for from Cleveland. They were $100 million apart. If you thought he was going to sign a similar deal with the Mets, major market team, richest owner in Major League Baseball, and it was going to be a similar contract that he was asking for in Cleveland that he was going to sign here in New York, well, that was never going to happen. So he was going to ask for more just based on the circumstances, and the circumstances have changed.